Welcome to KeepItReal Studios, the only channel on YouTube that keeps it real. 2024 is slowly coming to an end, and we had the last pay-per-view of the year go down. And overall, this card was a spectacle. It had twists and turns at every corner. We had retirements, we had upsets, we had questionable moments, and we just had a lot of things to remember from that night. Usually, when breaking down these videos, I tend to focus on the main card, but UFC 310 was quite different. Former champions were in the prelims. Since the UFC is deciding to disrespect some of its former champions and putting them in the prelims, I'm going to focus on the prelims cards first, then move on to the main card. The first fight on the card was a welterweight bout between Randy Brown and Bryan Battle. This was quite a close round. Going in, I had it 1-1. The third round was probably the tiebreaker. But to me, I felt like the first round, Randy Brown was doing good. Then towards the end of the round, that's when Bryan Battle did better. So overall, I could kind of see that being a tie. I feel like a lot of fights on this card could have gone 5 rounds, and this was one of those fights too as well. And a lot of people did not like the outcome of the judge's decision, and Bryan Battle was battling with the fans. The next fight was a featherweight bout between Aljamain Sterling versus Movsar Evloev, and this was a very technical battle. It was full of scrambles and twisted turns. This was a very high-level fight, with the former bantamweight champion Aljamain Sterling moving up to fight a monster like Evloev was very interesting to see. To me, I felt like these two were actually evenly matched in skill. It felt like whoever made a mistake, the other one was going to capitalize them. If you go back and watch the first round, there was a moment where Aljamain Sterling picked him up and slammed him down. Then he got a little bit too excited, and Movsar capitalized from that and won the end of that round. So it was quite interesting to see that just happen throughout those 3 rounds. And I felt like this was another fight on the card that should have gone 5 rounds. And it was a very close fight. I could see why they gave it to Movsar, but this fight should have been 5 rounds. The next 2 fights on the prelim cards were a lot more anticipated. These 2 fights actually had a finish instead of going all the way to the decision. We had Vicente Luque having a first round submission with 52 seconds. Vicente Luque just showed that he's still at the top of his game. If you actually look towards Vicente Luque's career, he's very skilled. He's a very high level fighter. He just faces a lot of fighters who are just a skill gap above him. So it just makes him not look as good. But Vicente Luque is still a very technical fighter. And the way he just cinched that choke in was incredible. The next fight on the card was a matchup between Dominic Reyes and Anthony Smith, and this was actually quite a very well-placed matchup because at this point in their careers they both needed a stylistic matchup like this. But unfortunately, I do believe Anthony Smith took this fight not at the right time in his career due to the personal issues with his friend passing, and Anthony Smith unfortunately does seem to have retired at UFC. But I feel like Anthony Smith is also one of those fighters that you love, but you don't really realize it. There's a lot of funny moments he has in the UFC, but when you actually look into his legacy and all these fights he has and how long he's been in the UFC, you kind of realize, oh, he's kind of a legend in this sport. The main card of the evening was quite spectacular. There were a little bit of moments that were a little bit controversial, quite similar to the prelim card, but overall still a fun and exciting card. The first fight on the card was a featherweight bout between Nate Landwehr versus Choi Do-Hoo, and Choi Do-Hoo showed absolute fundamentals in this fight. He showed very high level boxing. He showed very good feints, good jabs, and amazing composure in the octagon. Even while he had Nate Landwehr hurt, he was still very technical and still precise. And towards the end, he just kept on battering Nate and eventually got the knockout. Ever since his last fight with Josh Emmett, nobody expected to see Bryce Mitchell step foot into the octagon again. Then at UFC, he decided to go up against Kron Gracie. From the moment the fight started, Bryce Mitchell was on the hunt. He showed fundamentals, and he looked even better with his takedowns and his striking. Bryce Mitchell showed to still be at the top of the featherweight division by getting the KO with a vicious elbow on Kron Gracie. The next fight on the card was a heavyweight bout between Ciryl Gane versus Alexander Volkov. And this was one of the other fights on the card that should have definitely been a 5-rounder. This was quite a back and forth. I had a 1-1 going into the third round. Then towards the third round, I definitely had Alexander Volkov winning, and especially the end of the round, I felt like he dominated and kind of accumulated a lot of points. I definitely believe that Gane definitely had a little bit more of the significant strikes, but there were moments where Alexander Volkov just looked more precise and more technical. He definitely looked bewildered towards the end of the fight. So maybe that's why the judges gave it to Gane. But it was still quite controversial. I still understand why it could have gone either or. This is what I mean. A lot of more fights just need to be 5 rounds instead of 3. The next fight on the card was the co-main event between Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Ian Machado Gary. We had 2 undefeated fighters going up against each other, and the crazy backstory is these 2 have actually trained and sparred multiple times with each other, and apparently Shavkat Rakhmonov has also submitted Ian Gary once in the past. The matchup between Shavkat Rakhmonov and Ian Gary was quite interesting because you could definitely tell between this fight they understood each other's techniques. These fighters definitely came in technical and prepared and looked sharp on that night. Especially when it came to the striking, I do kind of have to give Shavkat a little bit of advantage because he did seem to be landing the significant strikes. When it came to the grappling, Shavkat definitely looked like he had trouble taking down Ian Gary, but he still had his moments. Ian Gary and Shavkat definitely had an unexpected pace coming into this fight. I feel like a lot of people were expecting more of a crazy brawl, but it was quite calm and technical and a little bit of a slower pace. The craziest moment of the fight was definitely when Ian Gary almost submitted Shavkat, because Shavkat definitely looked like he was about to get submitted and he was deep in that choke, but he did look like he had his chin tucked in tight, and Shavkat managed to escape and still pull off the victory in the end with a decision win. And for the main event, we had a fight for the flyweight championship of the world, and it was between Alexandre Pantoja versus Kai Akasora. And overall, this fight was a spectacle from start to finish. Pantoja came out aggressive, man. He did not give Kai Akasora any chances. Throughout this whole build up to the fight, they were trying to hype him up, saying he was this big fighter from the other side of the country. He had crazy knockouts, spectacles, and a lot of championship victories. But Alexander Pantoja straight disrespected them that night in the octagon and got the submission victory. Don't get me wrong, I do believe Kai Akasora performed wonderfully. I do believe he did everything perfectly that night. The only problem in his game plan was he was going up against Alexandre Pantoja. People tend to forget that this guy is an absolute monster, man. He was locked in. Throughout the whole fight week, you can definitely see this guy wanted the smoke. Overall, those are just my thoughts on UFC, and overall it was a very decent card. There were definitely a lot of moments that did kind of bring the card down, but if I had to give it a rating out of 10, I'll definitely give it a 6. I feel like in terms of just the fight and the fighters in itself, there were a lot of good fights to just watch and witness. I was definitely on the edge of my seat a lot in these fights. I feel like if some of those moments actually went down, it would have made this card a lot more spectacle and a little bit higher in the rating. But hey, sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. But overall, still a very solid card and a very good way to close off the year. It's been a very wonderful year for the UFC, and I'm just so grateful to have started this series of just breaking down all the UFC cards. And thank you all just for watching, and thank you all for just taking part of this journey that I'm gonna do. And I'm looking forward to just doing more of this Ultimate Fight reviews in the future. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and that'll be it for today's video. And don't forget to keep it real.